Do the Heat need a top-level star? The Celtics' path to a potential title might show otherwise, and what players could Miami add to the roster to put them in title contention? Plus, we grade a trade idea by Bill Simmons and much more on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Heat, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat, whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day, Monday to Friday. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil, both of us credentialed Heat media members. I want to get to a fake trade idea later on, but I want to first start today's show by rethinking something that has pretty much been an assumption since the season has ended, maybe even before that, David. We've talked a lot about how the Heat need a top scorer, with or without Jimmy Butler. Can Jimmy Butler be that guy? Is he too old to be that guy? All these things. But I'm watching these finals. The Celtics are up 2-0. Despite the fact that no Celtic has scored more than 26 points in a game, their best player, Jason Tatum, still struggling with his jumper, but their defense has been phenomenal. Role players have made three-point shots. And I just wonder, if the Celtics go on to win this series looking like this, is the lesson that teams can learn from them? Because we see this every year, right? You kind of take a lesson from whoever won the championship. Is the lesson that we could take from this Celtics team that the ensemble approach with 5 players who fit really well together, who are all high-end players, but you don't really have that top-tier star. And even with Tatum not playing that great, I don't think anybody, even when at his best, would put him at like the Luka Doncic, Nikola Jokic, Giannis level, right? He's something short of that. So is the lesson here that if you don't have that top-tier star, that you can assemble 5 players who just fit really well together, complement each other's skill sets, and then that could be a replacement for that top-tier star? What do you think?
Well, first, I think that some people, especially in the New England area, would offer the idea that Tatum is probably a top 5 player in the NBA. And I think this is kind of...
He could be 5, but he's not. I think there's a very clear Luka, Giannis, Embiid, and Jokic. I think those guys are the 4 best players in the league, and there are not...
Gilgeous-Alexander?
He's almost there. He's close. I would put Shea and Tatum in maybe a similar tier right below those 4 guys. And it's always been like the idea that you need that top tier guy. And I do think that I don't really care what Celtics fans think. I think most reasonable people who watch the NBA closely would agree. And that's been the thing against the Celtics this whole time is they don't have a Luka, right? They don't have that guy. That's the guy that can make the difference. And Tatum, if they lose,
with that idea. Like, I mean, you're putting me in a spot here because, like, you're putting me, like, this is the theoretical hard place and the rock here in the terms that I don't want to be supporting the Celtics, nor do I want to be.
Would you put Tatum in that tier with Giannis, Luka, Jokic, those guys?
I think we're kind of overstating things. Like, a top 5 player isn't the path to a finals run. I think with the like, Luka has been a top 5 player. Giannis has been a top 5 player, and he ran into a wall in Miami. And Embiid has been, a top 5 player, but he's built on a house of cards. This is the idea, I think, is that you do need complementary players. That's above all else what I'm taking from the Boston's finals run. But I think that goes back even to last year's. Like, you look at Denver and their championship, like, Nikola Jokic is a phenomenal player, the best player in the league 3 years running, maybe even longer than that, whatever. The point being that he makes the other players around him better, and they needed those other players to step up, whether it was an Aaron Gordon or Christian Brown or anybody else had to step up in order for a championship. You could not just have the days of, say, Kobe Bryant, or even well before that, Michael Jordan, of saying, here's the ball, make it happen.
I want to be clear. I'm not saying that alone does it. I'm almost using that as but it is a requirement. You need a good roster, obviously, but on the top of that good roster, and this is why championships are so hard, by the way, on top of that good roster, you need that top-tier talent, because even last year, it was Jokic, top-tier talent, right? Arguably the best player in the league. The year before that, it was Giannis. Or, I'm sorry, it was Steph, one of these top-tier historic, all-timer guys. Before that, it was Giannis. Before that, it was LeBron. Right? Like, these are the guys that we're talking about leading these championship teams. And I
But
think
isn't playoff Jimmy that player though? That's the whole idea though. That's the kind of notion that
this
we've
is
been
sort of what we're
talking
getting
about.
at. And so to your point also, it's like, have we been looking at this wrong? Has it been like we've been so obsessed with Donovan Mitchell and whoever it might, or Damian Lillard or whoever it might be, where really what the Heat should be doing is sort of rising up the role players around Jimmy and Bam and those two all-star players. Maybe the rest of the supporting cast has not been up to that level. And we talked about fit yesterday too. Maybe fit needs to be dialed in a little bit more.
Yeah, I don't think we're breaking news on that. I think you can still have a top level player, say a la Mitchell or even Jimmy in playoff prime. At the same time, that doesn't take away from the fact that you need to supplement and complement those players, whoever are at the top of the hierarchy, with better role players. I disagree with the notion that a lot of Heat fans have that Bam is a glorified role player. Maybe that's one way of putting it, but I think that's overly simplistic and it's kind of derogatory because the reality is if he's a role player, he's the best damn role player on the planet. And I don't think you can look at him in that way. That's like saying Scottie Pippen was a role player just because he had to play second fiddle to arguably the best player in NBA history. So I don't know if that's twice in the show that I made a Chicago Bulls reference, but that's to look at what Miami's roster construction, I think you could still win. The idea that you can win with Jimmy Butler was not a foreign one. And I think we talked about it regularly during last offseason, that you needed, say, a Damian Lillard to take over the scoring load so that Jimmy could become that 2A, that high-level role player, mastering everything on defense, providing great offense when necessary, and not having to take over the scoring load. Unfortunately, the idea was that Tyler Hero was going to be evolving into a greater offensive player. That never happened. And so you had a roster that was built around that idea that it could have worked. We never got to see it to fruition. They never got Damian Lillard. Jimmy wasn't healthy. Tyler never evolved. And I think all those combination of factors led to Miami's unfortunate playoff ouster earlier this year. So you look at what happens next, and I don't think it's unfair to say that you could build a title contender if Jimmy is healthy and available, and if he can still take his game to that otherworldly level in the postseason. That's just the biggest if, and I don't know that Miami or Jimmy is prepared to answer that. As far as the surrounding cast, to your overall point, like, can Tyler evolve? Can you make trades for those complementary players that will take Miami into a much broader window of opportunity? I don't know. And I think that's the big question.
I think that there was a time where the Heat could have done what the Celtics did. And it was probably 2 years ago and a year ago but I do think that Jimmy Butler is a little too old now to be relied on to be that guy. I mean, the guy played 60 games last year, showed up for 45 of them, and wasn't available for the playoffs. And he's going to be 35 years old next year. And that's very different than Jason Tatum at 26, 27, Jaylen Brown at 27 years old. Like, it's different. And even as much as Tatum has struggled with his jumper in the finals, and the fact that Jaylen Brown has been awesome on both sides of the ball, but hasn't scored more than 22 points or 23 points in a game in these finals.
Yeah.
Like, those guys also averaged almost, I think Tatum was at 28, 29 points per game in the regular season, which was about 9 more than Jimmy Butler averaged. Jaylen Brown averaged almost 6 or 7 more points than Jimmy Butler averaged in the regular season. I think we, as analysts, sort of talk about we can overanalyze the game and be like, wow, well, this guy, what he does on defense and the passing and the screening and all this stuff. It's like, well, the most important stat still at the end of the day is putting points on the board. And the Heat don't really have that guy. But I guess to the point was, if you were trying to go find that guy in Donovan Mitchell or Damian Lillard, whoever it is the idea that player is that top. I guess that player still wouldn't be at like the Nikola Jokic, Giannis level or Luka level. But I don't know. I do wonder that I'm watching these finals, and it's clear that the Celtics, if their three-point shot is falling and their defense could be this elite, that they don't even need their star players to play as well as the opposing star player, Luka, who is easily, arguably maybe the best player in the league, the way that he's gotten better this year, right? It's probably him or Jokic at this point.
Yeah.
And it hasn't much mattered because the Celtics across the board are just so much better that I do wonder if the Heat can't find that top-tier star, if they should try to do something like what the Celtics are doing and say, you know what? we don't have that top tier guy, but we have 2 all-stars in Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, and we just got to get better players around them as opposed to trying to go get that whale. Just go get really high-end complementary pieces who fit their skill sets really well. Let's put a pin in this for now, though.
Okay.
No, go ahead. Make your last point. Make your last point.
No, because I want to build out something. It's something that I've been kind of tinkering around with, so I'll bring it up in the next segment. Then.
All right, we're going to talk about how the Heat can do this, build their version of the Celtics roster. Plus, later on, we have a fake trade idea proposed by Bill Simmons that we're going to grade. That's coming up next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. We all know that we've got a lot to be dealing with now and then. I mean, it's a gloomy day out here in South Florida, lots of rain, never ending. It doesn't look like it's going to be ending anytime soon. I know whenever I get that kind of weather, whenever I'm stuck in the house sometimes and it just feel like, or even have to go out for a drive, it's just kind of brings you down, right? And there are things that are much larger than just a bad day out there. And maybe you've got something you got to get off your chest and you don't know who to talk to. You don't want to talk to a family member or a coworker. You want somebody with an unbiased perspective. If that's the case, you're probably thinking of giving therapy a try. And if that's the case, why don't you give BetterHelp a shot? Because it's really convenient, entirely online, designed to be easy for you to use, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire, takes no more than a few minutes, and you're instantly matched with a licensed therapist. And if for whatever reason you need to switch a therapist because your schedule's changed, or maybe you just have a conflict for whatever reason, you want to switch it up, no additional charge, no time at all. Everything is done to suit you and to help you along your path to a better mental health. So get it off your chest today with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Miami Heat talk every day, 5 days a week. If you're new to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We're on the road to 14,000 subscribers. You can help us out. Also, you can follow us on your favorite podcast app. What's the point you wanted to make before we get to our next section here?
I was just thinking about in weeks ago when we were talking about the roster construction and everything else like that. Like, what if you looked at the starting lineup specifically as like a 50-point rating scale, each player representing somewhere on the scale of 1 to 10, and trying to get as close to 50. That's the goal as far as when I think of what you should be doing. And if you're going to be using the Boston Celtics as a role model, is that you've got Tatum as what on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of like the worst player
9
in the NBA and the best player. A 9, right? Jaylen Brown, 8, 9, somewhere around there. Yeah. Jrue Holiday, 7. Kristaps Porzingis, 7. Derek White, also a 7. Like right now, you look at that roster, that's like what? I'm off the top of my head, a 42. That's a pretty high complementary roster there in terms of like we've got 5 players who can get as close to a perfect team, a perfect score of 50 as you can get around the NBA. You look at Miami's roster, playoff Jimmy. Playoff Jimmy is what? A 9, a 10? Playoff
9,
Jimmy.
Yeah.
9 or 10. Playoff Bam, 8 or 9.
8 or 9. Yep. 8.
But then you've got playoff Kyle Lowry from last year, or
that's it. You got nobody else that's higher than a 5 on the entire, unless you count Eastern Conference Finals Caleb, who's a 11 apparently. But it's you have nobody else. I think of it very similar to that too. I kind of put it on the scale of, all right, how many of the top 60 or 70 players do you have in the NBA? Because those to me are the real difference making players. When you get that top 60, once you get past that, they're pretty replaceable. But the top 60 or 70. And you could argue that the Celtics have all 5 guys in their starting lineup in the top 60 or 70. I don't think it is arguable. I think they're all solidly in there. Most of them in the top 40 or 50.
Like Derek White and Porzingis probably would have been out of that. Jrue Holiday, maybe again, he had lost a little luster in his last season in Milwaukee. But I think looking at how they complement each other and looking at what Jrue did in game 2, I think they've all risen into that. That's pretty impressive. Like, I mean, to have 5 players in the top 60, and that's your starting lineup. And it's not like Al Horford's a slouch either. I hate that we're doing this. We are lauding the hell out of the Boston Celtics.
I know, but the point being is that I think Brad Stevens, as an executive, had made a decision that, or had, I guess, an acknowledgement, a realization that Tatum was never going to be the guy who could pull maybe an under-talented roster to a championship. And
26 anyway.
Sure. And I think he is pretty much what he's going to be. And by the way, if you're the 5th or 6th player in the NBA, that's still really good. I just think that there's another tier above him right now, right? But I think he came to a realization that we need to give this guy as much help as possible. So we're going to trade 2 first-round picks for Derek White. We're going to make the deal for Kristaps Porzingis. And then very fortunately, Drew Holiday basically fell into their lap. And they built this ensemble cast. So if I'm the Heat, basically, this is what I'm coming down to is I still think the top tier star is the way to go. If you can get yourself a Hall of Fame, if you can get yourself a Luka, a Jokic, obviously do that. But those players are so hard to get. Again, there's only 4 of them right now in the NBA, and even the Joel Embiid thing in terms of the playoffs is questionable. Yeah. So anything beyond that, I think you basically look at the Celtics and say, all right, well, if we don't have that top guy, then let's just raise all boats here and just make sure that we might not have the ceiling because I still think that the Mavericks ceiling is higher than Boston's ceiling. They just haven't even come close to touching it, just because of how much better Luka is than everybody else on the court in these finals. But Boston's floor is so high that in a 7-game series, their opportunity to win 4 games, because they're just always hitting this high floor, is greater than maybe Dallas, who has a much lower floor, reaching their ceiling 4 times out of 7. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get it. I think that makes a lot of sense.
So if I'm looking at how the Celtics put the roster together, because it wasn't just let's go get a bunch of 7s, 8s, and 9s or top 60 players. It was, no, we have a system that we're going to play. So you made the great point before. They all complement each other well, which probably raises all of their ratings here. I think the number one thing that they have is shooting, right? They can all shoot the ball. Going in Porzingis, they're 5-out offense. All of its stuff's been talked about plenty. They have no minus defenders in the starting lineup, which is something that's very apparent in these playoffs. There's nobody you could get on an island and just go ahead and attack. The closest thing to that is probably Porzingis. And even then, he provides such great rim protection that it basically neutralizes it out. And the other part of it, too, is they're smart. They limit mistakes. They don't turn the ball over. They don't force a ton of turnovers, but they just don't turn the ball over. So it's going to be really hard for them to beat themselves. And it's why I think we always focus, and even Boston fans will focus on the fact that maybe they're too reliant on the 3-point shot. It's kind of the only weakness outside of them not having that top tier star that you can really kind of pick at. But for the most part, they don't turn the ball over. They play good, disciplined defense. There's nobody you can target defensively, and everybody can shoot, right? If you're the Heat, let's say you wanted to follow that exact checklist because it's proven out to basically get you a 2-0 lead in the NBA Finals. Well, who fits the bill, right? I think. Well, I guess because you're building around Jimmy and Bam, who are non-shooters.
Correct.
But I would say that they're both elite defenders who don't make mistakes, always making the right play. So then around them, you also need the other 3 things. You need smart players who can shoot the ball and cannot be targeted defensively. So that, I think we all know who we're talking about here when you're talking about the players who don't fit that.
Right.
And I know that the Heat have been able to put together a top 5 defense. I still think that Miami's defense is like the Jason Tatum of defenses this year. It's really good, but it wasn't Orlando. It wasn't Minnesota. Like those defense win you games. I never felt like Miami's defense was winning them games. I thought Miami's defense was keeping them in games, but it was never winning them games because it was that dominant. I think they need a defense that can win them games. You know what I mean? And that means taking away those pokey points.
Yeah, no, you didn't look at Miami's defense and were like, oh, they're going to get a stop here. It was kind of fingers crossed and hoping, maybe they get a good switch or something like that. But no, I think you're absolutely right. Like their defense, I think a lot of that maybe even bears out just the fact that, their pace slows things down. I think that kind of
some of that was overstated. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Great point. Yeah. So I've got a list of targets here.
Okay.
That I want to get to. These aren't big names. That's sort of the point here. But guys who you could add to that starting lineup around Jimmy and Bam to kind of raise the floor and hit these check marks. So the first one I want to bring up is Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. He's a free agent, and he's not going to be gettable based on where Miami is right now against the salary cap. But if you were to make a cost-cutting move, shed salary, and basically a salary dump of some of these players who don't fit this checklist, maybe you would be able to unlock the full non-taxpayer mid-level exception and offer KCP a 3-year contract at $46 million, whatever that kind of comes out to. You plug him in, elite two-way player who makes open shots, doesn't necessarily need the ball, can guard 3 different positions, switches everything. That seems like a good target to me.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
I don't think there's any denying that. Like the championship experience,
Yep,
the
good
idea,
point.
everything that he brings. Like he
Smarts,
won a
yeah.
championship. Yeah, he's always been.
Two
He's a complimentary
championships.
player. Yeah, 2. One in Los Angeles with the Lakers in the bubble, and then again with the Denver Nuggets. Like he's been a great fit there. I imagine. Look, he's from Greenville, Georgia. I don't know if that's close enough where he'd want to be like close to Miami. I mean, I
think he
probably
would
not gonna
relish
help.
just playing for the Heat anyway. This seems like his kind of organization, right? Championship
It does.
winning, appreciate the little things, play defense. I've got a few more free agent targets, or not free agent targets, trade targets, a little bit of that kind of stuff. We also have a fake trade idea between the Heat and the Hawks that we're going to talk about and grade. That's all coming up next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, the NHL Finals, and much more. And you can bet it all over at FanDuel because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet everything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. Wes, you brought up the point yesterday. You know, on Locked NBA, we talked about the fact that you thought Tatum might be an outside chance at winning Finals MVP. And you know what? My co-host at the time, Tony East, he agrees with you. You got anything else that you think might be of interest if you want to place a little wager?
We'll see how many wins I actually end up coming. No, but the cool thing about FanDuel is they have these head-to-head player prop specials. So, you know, you could bet on the spread of the game. You could bet on the spread difference between like player points, right? So for instance, for game 3 in Dallas, Wednesday night, Jason Tatum at plus 5.5, Luka Doncic at minus 5.5. So in other words, do you think that Luka will score fewer or more than 5.5 more points than Jason Tatum? Right. So would you take
more?
I think I like Luka at minus 5.5. So to win this, if you bet Luka to win this, he would have to score basically 6 more points than Tatum. So do you like Tatum or Luka in that?
I like Luka. I'm getting
too.
6 points more than Tatum, just based on what we've seen. But with Kristaps Porzingis out for game 3, now does Tatum take over the scoring load? Does he become much more of a singular focus type player?
He might
like
be
is
out
he
for game 3? We're not sure yet, right?
He's day to day over the series now, but with whatever tear that was. So I mean, it's interesting. I'm curious to see how that plays out. Like, do they change?
Kyrie?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But they also have Kyrie at minus 1.5 more than Jaylen Brown. So is Kyrie going to score 2 more points than Jaylen Brown? That one's a little bit more iffy. And at plus 114, I kind of like Kyrie coming back with a bounce back game, and the odds are much better than the Luka Tatum one. That's probably where I would go with this.
Well, if you want to look it up, go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. Let us know what non-stars you think the Heat should acquire in the comments section. We're going to review a few more of them here. Also, follow us on your favorite podcast app. Before we get to Bill Simmons' fake trade idea, we talked about KCP. A couple more names that I want to throw at you. Alex Caruso, elite defender, all-NBA first-team guy, defense first, second team, whatever that's called. Can hit open jumpers. Not necessarily productive offensively, maybe a little too reluctant to shoot, but I think with the right coach and the right system that really encourages him to do it, a guy who's won a championship, could almost be like the Drew Holiday of this roster in terms of just being a lockdown perimeter defender.
Yes, except I just still see that you don't have the top level score to balance that out. Like you can have Drew Holiday occasionally crap the bed, as Milwaukee Bucks fans will gladly point out. But they also, had a Giannis who could go off for 40 to 50 points, especially if he's hitting his shots from the line. They've got Tatum, they've got Brown, they've got those guys that fill the elite scoring. Even playoff Jimmy, I don't know if he's enough to complement what Caruso campered is. Like, I don't know when's the last time Caruso had a 20-point game, and I don't know that that's likely to happen, especially in Miami either. So that would be like
redefining. All contingent on Jimmy Butler and having a bounce back year and Bam Adebayo continuing
Jimmy
to grow offensively. Right?
Yeah,
I
get it.
on all that stuff. Yeah.
Are are you hoping or believing that perhaps Bam can become like a top 15-ish scorer? Like, I don't know.
No. I guess what I'm saying here is if the Heat aren't able to go get, they probably still need to go get a guy who's a top.
If you can swing the trade, sorry to cut you off. If you can swing the trade for Donovan Mitchell, and somehow, if you're whether that means Jimmy's on the roster or not, and then you can add a Caruso,
See,
that makes a lot of sense.
Sure. It also feels almost impossible because you're going to trade so much of your stuff to get Donovan Mitchell.
We're throwing reality out the door here, man. This isn't the case here, you know.
I think,
know a lot of these.
To me, going and getting Mitchell is the obvious thing. Go get Mitchell, add him to Jimmy Butler and Bam. But that to me is more of the big three model that we've seen in other places. That's less of the Celtics sort of ensemble cast type of model. You know, so there's still going to need somebody to step up in scoring. Like, could Terry Rozier
what if you don't
that?
have Jimmy? What if you don't have Jimmy on the roster for whatever reason? Like, let's say trading Jimmy to Philadelphia for those trade assets to acquire Donovan Mitchell, but then you build that roster, which is much more balanced now because Jimmy and Bam, as we talked about in yesterday's episode, not necessarily complementary. Now you've got Mitchell as your top scorer. That's your clear dog on 1A in offense. Then you've got Bam, who's your clear dog on defense. That balances out, and now you just kind of fill out the rest of the roster with those complementary players, of which Caruso, I think, is a very good fit because now you got
KCP, all these guys. I look at guys like we don't have to go down the we don't have to deep dive on these guys, but other names that I just thought of: Bruce Brown, Marcus Smart, Dorian Finney-Smith, two-way players who can hit open jumpers, handle the ball a little bit in Bruce Brown's case, play great defense, guard multiple positions. You could switch everything. To me, that's the sort of thing I'm looking at, and I'm also just looking at where the Heat's deficiencies are now, besides not having that top-tier scorer, and it is just too many guys who could be targeted defensively, and maybe just honestly too many undrafted guys who are too inconsistent, right? Just too many guys who come from the pipeline that you're relying way too much on. Now, I do think a guy like Haywood Highsmith helps this roster. Duncan Robinson helps this roster, but those are guys that should be coming off the bench, not necessarily being relied on to post up against the Celtics in the first round of the playoffs. So that's where we're at.
If you use that 10-point scale rating, Highsmith is a 4 with potential to be maybe a 5 or 6. But I mean that seems pushing it. And again, that's all like that role should be defined by players that are much better, not like, oh, he's a starter, we need him to be out there and put up 14 points in order just to give us a chance to win, that kind of thing, which is unfortunately what his role had been with Miami last year.
Let's talk about Bill Simmons' fake trade idea. He said it on his show this week with Ryan Russillo, and I actually thought it was pretty interesting. And I was more surprised that both of them loved the trade. So here's the trade: Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson with the 15th pick and a 2029 first to the Atlanta Hawks for Trae Young, and they both love this idea for both sides. What do you think about it?
It's a little difficult to stomach. I know what the perspective is. Like, you're looking at Trae, he's a top 10-ish, top 15-ish type player. He's your offensive engine. He makes a lot more sense, and he's complementary of Jimmy and Bam in a way that we're talking about here. Now you've got your top player, et cetera, as far as being able to carry the load offensively. I just feel like you're also giving up a lot. But I don't know. I'm having a hard time justifying it one way or the other. Like, to me, it feels like no, you're giving up way too much. But at the same time, you're talking about a player Trae's level, all-star caliber type player, and he does fit a lot of those needs as far as like, he can be your go-to scorer. And then you've still got Bam and Jimmy on the roster. It makes a whole hell of a lot of sense. And while it's tough to give up Tyler and Duncan and the promise of a first-round pick and another first-round pick on top of that, I don't know. I'm having a hard time saying no to it. So I guess I would have to give it the thumbs up, but really, really begrudgingly.
Yeah, and there's the whole, do you want Trae Young on your team part of this?
Yeah,
which, it's a thing. But if there's going to be a team that gets the most out of Trae Young, it would be the Heat, wouldn't it? Like, and that doesn't deal with this stuff. Trae Young he's gotten 2 different coaches fired now, and he's not getting Spo ain't going nowhere. You know what I mean? LeBron couldn't get Spoelstra fired. So Trae Young's got no shot. And he complements exactly what Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo do and don't do. Jimmy and Bam love playing defense. They look forward to playing defense. They kind of want to get the offensive possessions over with. and go back on defense. Trae Young loves playing offense and taking all the shots. Jimmy Butler doesn't want to take any of the shots. Bam would love to not take as many shots. Here, Trae, you want all the shots? Have them. You can have them.
Passing, with his passing, like those.
So the other thing too, with everything that's been going on in Atlanta, you could argue they have less offensive talent than Miami does, outside of Trae Young, like outside of their top guy. It's because even DeJounte Murray, as talented as he is, they do not complement each other well at all. It's your turn, my turn. It's not that great. And besides that, DeAndre Hunter didn't pan out. Bogdan Bogdanovic is good off the bench. That's about it, man. That's all you really got going on there. And despite all of that and the coaching changes and all the injuries that team has dealt with over the last couple of years as well, it's still a walking top 10 offense every year for the last 4 years. And that's because of Trae Young, who might be the best pick and roll passer in the NBA, is a capable three-point shooter, spaces the floor. It does make a whole hell of a lot of sense for Miami. The part that I always go back to is I just have a really hard time seeing the Hawks trading Trae Young to a team in their own division that they have to see 4 times a year.
Unless they kind of lean into the fact that they're rebuilding, like given the 3rd round pick of the first overall pick this year, the idea is, you know what, we're just starting over from scratch.
Interesting.
Maybe they'll trade Murray back to San Antonio.
Yeah, it's almost more likely that they would do this if they traded both of them, Trae Young and DeJounte Murray, right? They said, well, we don't really care if you're going to win the division the next 4 years because we don't really plan on it anyway.
Right, exactly.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. That could be the case, right? And then for Atlanta, I kind of like this for them. You get a couple of first-round picks. You get Tyler Hero. You get Duncan, who you could flip to another team probably for some sort of asset.
Yeah, a team in title contention that needs shooting is like, okay, we got ourselves a Duncan Robinson on virtually an expiring contract. With Tyler, it's almost the same thing. It's like, you know what? We can have him on our roster. He can carry our offense for the next 3 years while we're a middling rebuilding team, and it's no sweat off our back. You know, we don't care. Like, you know, we'll have him on the roster, and that's fine. And I bet you, he'd be pretty popular in Atlanta too. So I think it would be interesting. It's not a bad trade. I give it a A-.
A-?
Yeah.
I'll go B. Plus? B plus?
That's I was at B+, A-. It's like, you know what, give him the extra point.
All right. Good for you. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your podcast app.